How do you say, what do you need in Spanish? And how would you answer that question? If you're not sure, don't worry. By the end of this video, you'll be able to ask and answer 15 everyday questions in Spanish. Empecemos! Today we're going to be practicing with 5 question words in Spanish. ¿Qué? ¿Dónde? ¿Cuál? ¿Cuáles? And ¿Cuánto? These are some of the most common question words you'll need in everyday conversations, but there are a few more. We'll start with ¿qué? What? How would you say, what are you doing in Spanish? We already know that what is ¿qué? For the rest of the question, we can use haces. ¿Qué haces? ¿Qué haces? In Spanish, we can use the present tense to talk about something we're doing right now. Unlike in English we have to use the progressive tense. Word for word, what are you doing translates to ¿qué estás haciendo? ¿Qué estás haciendo? That's also an appropriate question, so you can use ¿qué haces? Or ¿qué estás haciendo? But ¿qué haces? Is more common. Now, how would you answer this question? Let's say you're working on your computer. So if we use the present tense, we can say trabajo, I work, trabajo en mi computadora, on my computer. Trabajo en mi computadora. Trabajo en mi computadora. If you use the progressive tense, you could say estoy trabajando en mi computadora. Estoy trabajando en mi computadora. So instead of I work on my computer, it means I'm working on my computer. But in Spanish, again, you can use the present tense and it has the same meaning. How do you say, what do you think in Spanish? So again, here we start with ¿qué? ¿Qué? What? And do you think is piensas. Piensas. ¿Qué piensas? ¿Qué piensas? So in Spanish, we don't need to use the pronouns most of the time because the verbs are conjugated to the person. We could say, ¿qué piensas tú? If you really want to add the pronoun, ¿qué piensas tú? But it's not needed because piensas is conjugated to the person. ¿Qué piensas? Now the answer. How would you say, I think it's a good idea? I think is pienso. Pienso que es una buena idea. Pienso que es una buena idea. Pienso is I think. Que is that. Es, it is. Una buena idea, a good idea. In Spanish, we do have to use que. In English, we can omit it. I think it's a good idea, but we could say I think that it's a good idea. In Spanish, that que always needs to be there. Pienso que es una buena idea. Make sure you're also repeating so that you work on your pronunciation. Pienso que es una buena idea. How would you ask, what do you need? Again, we'll start with ¿qué? ¿Qué? And do you need is necesitas. ¿Qué necesitas? ¿Qué necesitas? And how would you say, I need more time? Necesito, I need, necesito más tiempo, more time. Necesito más tiempo. Necesito más tiempo. So when you ask the question, necesitas is conjugated to the second person, singular. And then to answer, you answer in the first person. So we change the verb to necesito. Necesito más tiempo. How would you say, what do you want? What is ¿qué? And do you want? ¿Quieres? ¿Qué quieres? ¿Qué quieres? What do you want? And a possible answer is, I want a coffee. How would you say that in Spanish? Quiero, I want, a coffee, un café. Quiero un café. Quiero un café. Another common question in Spanish is, ¿qué tienes? ¿Qué tienes? It literally means what do you have? And it could mean that, but most of the time it means what's wrong or what's the matter. ¿Qué tienes? It's not asking about physically what do you have. And to answer, it's more emotional. You could say nada. No tengo nada. Nothing's wrong. Nada. Or you could say what's wrong, how you're feeling. So I want you to notice the pattern here. The question uses the to form of the verb and the answer uses the yo form. So we talked about that too. But these are very simple questions because it's que plus a conjugated verb. It's simple but very powerful to inquire about something. And you only have to remember the verb conjugation for the singular, second person, and the first person. Let's do a quick review. I'll say the English, now try to say the Spanish. What are you doing? ¿Qué haces? What do you think? ¿Qué piensas? What do you need? ¿Qué necesitas? Did you get all three? If you didn't, just go back a little bit and review them all. Now let's move on to ¿dónde? Where? ¿Dónde? For example, where are you? How would you ask that? We'll start with ¿dónde? ¿Dónde estás? ¿Dónde estás? ¿Dónde estás? So we use estar here as the form of to be because it's talking about a location and location can change. So most of the time, estar is for things that can change. They're not permanent. ¿Dónde estás? A possible answer is I'm at home. How would you say that in Spanish? Estoy, I'm, en casa. Estoy en casa. Estoy en casa. The next one is where do you work? How do you ask that? We start with ¿dónde? ¿Dónde trabajas? ¿Dónde trabajas? Do you work is trabajas. So remember that in Spanish we don't have those helping verbs like in English. ¿Dónde trabajas? A possible answer is I work in the office. How would you say that? I work is trabajo. Trabajo in an office, en una oficina. Trabajo en una oficina. Trabajo en una oficina. And how would you ask, where do you live? We start again with ¿dónde? ¿Dónde vives? ¿Dónde vives? ¿Dónde vives? And the possible answer is I live in Texas. How would you say that in Spanish? I live is vivo. Vivo en Texas. Vivo en Texas. So you can change Texas for another country or state or city. It all depends on the context. Vivo en, and then add the place. We're halfway through. You're doing great. We've practiced qué and dónde questions, and they both follow the same pattern. Question word plus conjugated verb. Now we're going to learn something that many students find tricky. The difference between cuál and cuáles. But first, if you're enjoying this practice, take a second to hit that like button. It really helps this channel and I post new lessons every week. Now, this next question word doesn't exist the same way in English. In English, we just say which, but in Spanish, we have two forms. ¿Cuál? And that one is used for singular, which one, and ¿cuáles? Which ones in plural. ¿Cuál and cuáles? Let me show you the difference. If I want to say which one do you want, in Spanish it is ¿cuál? And do you remember how to say do you want? ¿Quieres? ¿Cuál quieres? ¿Cuál quieres? So if we are talking about something in singular, we would use this. ¿Cuál quieres? And a possible answer is I want the red one, for example. I want, quiero. Quiero, very good. The red one, el rojo. if it's a masculine noun, or you could say la roja. La roja, if it's a feminine noun. Quiero el rojo. Quiero la roja. But if we're talking about more than one thing, which ones do you want? Here we use cuáles. Cuáles. But the verb doesn't change because we're still talking about you. What do you want? ¿Cuáles quieres? ¿Cuáles quieres? So here, instead of saying quiero el rojo, we use quiero los rojos. Quiero los rojos. Or for feminine nouns, we use quiero las rojas. Quiero las rojas. So we change cuál to cuáles, and then we change the answer to plural as well. You have to make sure to update the articles as well. So how do you say which do you prefer when talking about something in singular? We use cuál. ¿Cuál prefieres? ¿Cuál prefieres? ¿Cuál prefieres? And the possible answer, I prefer tea. I prefer is prefiero. Prefiero el té. Prefiero el té. So we're assuming that we're asking about drinks, maybe coffee or tea. Prefiero el té. And in plural, which ones do you prefer? How would you ask that? Which ones is cuáles. Cuáles. And then the verb doesn't change. It stays as prefieres. ¿Cuáles prefieres? ¿Cuáles prefieres? To answer, we could say, I prefer the red apples. How would you say that in Spanish? Prefiero, I prefer, prefiero las manzanas rojas. Prefiero las manzanas rojas. So in Spanish, the adjective usually comes after the noun, manzanas rojas. Prefiero las manzanas rojas. All right, time for another challenge. This time, I'll give you the Spanish question, and you try to answer in Spanish before I show it. ¿Dónde vives? The answer is vivo en. Vivo en. The next one, ¿cuáles quieres? The answer is quiero el or la. Quiero. And the next one, ¿qué necesitas? How would you answer? Necesito. Necesito. Very good. You're making great progress if you're learning this. If you still need to review, just make sure you go back. Our last group of questions uses cuánto, how much, or cuántos, how many. Just like cuál and cuáles, the difference is singular versus plural. How would you say, how much does it cost? How much here is cuánto, and does it cost? Cuesta. ¿Cuánto cuesta? ¿Cuánto cuesta? This is one of the most useful questions when you're shopping or traveling. ¿Cuánto cuesta? And to say it costs $20, how would you say that? Cuesta $20. Cuesta $20. Cuesta $20. ¿Cuánto cuesta? Cuesta $20. So we're not changing the verb here because we're talking about it, about something we're trying to purchase. Both the question and the answer refer to it. And now in plural, how would you say in Spanish, how many do you need? ¿Cuántos? ¿Cuántos? And do you need? Necesitas. ¿Cuántos necesitas? ¿Cuántos necesitas? So this is referring to plural nouns, but they are masculine plural nouns. If you are referring to feminine plural nouns, you would use cuántas. ¿Cuántas? ¿Cuántas necesitas? And then to answer, I need 3, how would you say that? I need is necesito. Necesito. And 3, tres. Necesito tres. Necesito tres. Similarly, how many do you want? We can use cuántos or cuántas depending on the gender of the nouns. And then do you want is quieres. ¿Cuántos quieres? ¿Cuántos quieres? Or ¿cuántas quieres? ¿Cuántas quieres? How do you say I want to? I want is quiero. Quiero dos. Quiero dos. Quiero dos. Now let's put everything together. I'll say the question in English and you try to say it in Spanish and give an answer in Spanish. You can pause the video if you need more time. What do you want? It means ¿qué quieres? And to answer we use quiero. Quiero. Next one. Where do you work? It means ¿dónde trabajas? ¿Dónde trabajas? And to answer, trabajo en. Trabajo en. All right. Next one. Which one do you prefer? What does it mean? So we're talking about singular. We are going to use ¿cuál prefieres? ¿Cuál prefieres? And I prefer is prefiero. Prefiero. How do you ask how much does it cost? How much is cuánto and does it cost? Cuesta. ¿Cuánto cuesta? ¿Cuánto cuesta? And to answer, cuesta, and then you add the amount. Cuesta. How do you ask what do you think? ¿Qué piensas? ¿Qué piensas? And to answer, pienso que. Pienso que. Excellent work today. You just practiced 15 questions and answers in Spanish. Remember, the best way to learn is to repeat. So come back to this video anytime you need to practice. And to learn more Spanish, go watch this video next. Muchas gracias.